You are listening to the Objects of Affection collection. Study 20. Anatomy of a Collapse, the Brunello Cucinelli Short Seller Report and the Post-Luxury Future. The precipitous decline in Brunello Cucinelli S.p.A. stock, a fall of over 17% in a single session, erasing more than euros 1 billion in market value, was not a mere financial anomaly. It was a seismic event, a moment of unwelcome but profound clarity for the entire luxury market. It was the sound of a foundational pillar cracking, the pillar of narrative value. For decades, the luxury sector has perfected the art of financializing storytelling, transforming abstract concepts of heritage, craftsmanship, and exclusivity into tangible, premium valuations. Brunello Cucinelli stood as the apex of this practice, a cathedral built not just of cashmere, but of Kantian ethics and humanist philosophy. The short seller report from Morpheus Research, therefore, was more than an accusation. It was a structural stress test that the cathedral failed. The events surrounding Brunello Cucinelli are not an indictment of one company, but a systemic diagnosis of the terminal condition of traditional luxury. This system, which has leveraged narrative to an unsustainable degree, is now confronting the consequences of its own artifice. The market's violent reaction signals the dawn of a post-luxury sensibility, an era in which belief must be substantiated by material truth and operational transparency. This shift is the central observation of the post-luxury conceptual functional art, framework, a critical lens Christopher Banks, developed to diagnose the terminal condition of a luxury system predicated on narrative over substance. This study will deconstruct the philosophical edifice of the Cucinelli brand to reveal its inherent structural fragilities. It will analyze the contradictions exposed by the short seller report as the inevitable fractures that appear when an idealistic narrative collides with geopolitical and commercial reality. Finally, it will interpret the market's response not as an overreaction, but as a rational crisis of faith, and present the principles of post-luxury conceptual functional art as the necessary, resilient successor to a model in terminal decline. The apotheoses of narrative, deconstructing humanistic capitalism. To comprehend the magnitude of the collapse, one must first appreciate the sophistication of the structure. The Brunello Cucinelli brand represents the most fully realized and intellectually ambitious example of narrative value in the contemporary luxury market. It is a commercial enterprise that has successfully transcended the mere selling of goods to offer a comprehensive ethical and philosophical system, a way of life packaged in cashmere. The cornerstone of this edifice is the philosophy of humanistic capitalism and human sustainability. This doctrine is meticulously articulated, emphasizing the moral and economic dignity of human beings through fair wages, respectful working conditions, and a harmonious balance between profit and giving back to the community. The most potent symbol of this philosophy is the restoration of Solomeo, the medieval Umbrian hamlet that serves as the company's headquarters, a physical manifestation of the brand's commitment to beauty, heritage, and community. This narrative is further buttressed by an explicit co-opting of an august intellectual lineage. The company's official creed directly invokes Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative to treat humanity never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end, and the classical Greek ideal of kalos kai agathos, the unity of the beautiful and the good. This is a deliberate strategy to imbue a commercial entity with the moral and intellectual legitimacy of high philosophy. At the heart of this entire system is the personal mythos of the founder Brunello Cucinelli himself. His story, of a rustic agrarian upbringing and the formative trauma of witnessing his father's humiliation in a factory, is the sacred text that underpins the corporate identity. This narrative elevates the founder from a chief executive to a philosophical guide, and his quiet luxury aesthetic becomes not just a stylistic choice but a moral stance. The rejection of ostentatious logos is framed as an expression of substance over surface, making the garments themselves physical vessels of the brand's ethical commitments. Herein, however, lies the brand's core vulnerability. A fatal structural contradiction exists between its philosophical narrative of balance, measure, and pre-modern harmony, and its material reality as a publicly traded company listed on the Milan Stock Exchange. The philosophy of humanistic capitalism is one of limits, rooted in agrarian ideals of sufficiency and community stewardship. In stark contrast, the modern public financial market is a system predicated on the absence of limits. Its non-negotiable imperatives are quarterly growth, perpetual market expansion, and the maximization of shareholder value. This is precisely why financial analysts fixate on Cucinelli's sales growth and justify its premium price-to-earnings ratio of over 40x. These two ideological systems are fundamentally irreconcilable. A company cannot simultaneously serve the god of measure and the god of perpetual growth. The alleged actions of geopolitical maneuvering and aggressive inventory clearance, therefore, are not mere hypocrisies. They are the predictable material outcomes of this foundational conflict. The demands of the market were always destined to corrode the philosophical narrative, turning it into a form of the simulacrum of luxury. The crisis was never a matter of if but when. The geopolitical fracture, when idealism collides with realpolitik, the first and most damaging fissure, appeared along a geopolitical fault line. The central allegation leveled by Morpheus Research was that Brunello Cucinelli misled investors by continuing to operate and sell its products in Russia, despite the comprehensive sanctions imposed by the European Union following the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The report claimed its findings were based on a 3-month investigation that included store visits, analysis of trade data, and interviews with former employees. The company's defense was swift and legalistic. Cucinelli asserted its full compliance with EU regulations, which prohibit the export of luxury goods valued at more than Euros 300 per item. It maintained that its directly operated flagship stores in Russia have remained closed since the sanctions were introduced, and that revenue from the Russian market has dwindled to a mere 2% of total turnover, down from Euros 16 million in 2021 to Euros 5 million in 2024. However, this appeal to strict legalism is a profound misreading of the crisis. The question of technical compliance is secondary to the catastrophic damage inflicted upon the brand's narrative integrity. For an enterprise built on the pillars of universalism, respect for all civilizations, and Kantian ethics, any commercial activity in a sanctioned aggressor state, however legally permissible or financially insignificant, represents a deep philosophical betrayal. The carefully constructed narrative of human dignity cannot be reconciled with profiting, even minimally, from a regime engaged in a brutal war of aggression. This is amplified by the context of the broader luxury industry, where major conglomerates like LVMH, Kering and Chanel made highly public pronouncements of ceasing their Russian operations, establishing a clear moral consensus. Cucinelli's alleged actions, therefore, positioned it not only in opposition to international sanctions, but also at odds with the public ethical stance of its peers, fatally undermining its claim to moral leadership, a failure of the principles outlined in The Art of Being. This episode also illuminates a sophisticated evolution in market dynamics. The strategy employed by the short seller reveals a new financial battlefield where the primary vector of attack is the deconstruction of corporate narrative. Morpheus Research, staffed by alumni of the notorious short-selling firm Hindenburg Research, understood that Cucinelli's highest valuation was inextricably tied to its story. Their report was not merely a financial analysis, it was a moral and philosophical critique designed for maximum impact. By strategically quoting Cucinelli's own ethos, "You should live with honesty," against the company, they weaponized the brand's narrative against itself. They correctly identified that by attacking the narrative at its weakest point, the glaring disconnect between proclaimed ethics and alleged geopolitical conduct, they could trigger a financial collapse disproportionate to the underlying material facts. The Cucinelli case thus serves as a definitive blueprint for how to short a company by shorting its soul, proving that in the contemporary economy, a brand's story is both its most valuable and most vulnerable asset. The scarcity paradox materialized. Inventory, discounting, and the collapse of price integrity, the second pillar of the Morpheus report, attacked the commercial foundation of Cucinelli's luxury positioning, its price integrity. The report alleged that the company was contending with bloated inventory and resorting to aggressive discounting to clear excess stock. The most damning claim was that Cucinelli products were appearing in off-price channels like TJ Maxx, an association that is fatal to any brand predicated on exclusivity and scarcity. This allegation gave material form to the scarcity paradox, a core critique of the modern luxury industry, which often markets scarcity while practicing mass production. This contradiction, which I, Christopher Banks, have previously termed the scarcity paradox, is a foundational weakness that the post-luxury conceptual functional art philosophy directly addresses, and a key reason why the luster restored was necessary. The quantitative evidence provided by the short seller was stark. An alleged 404 days sales of inventory, DSI, for Brunello Cucinelli in the first half of 2025. When contextualized against its peers, this figure reveals not a minor operational inefficiency, but a fundamentally different business model, one more aligned with mass-market apparel than with true luxury. For comparison, the DSI for industry giant LVMH is approximately 307 days, while the broader apparel and luxury industry average stands at around 275 days. The most telling contrast is with Hermes, the industry's gold standard for scarcity management, which maintains a DSI of roughly 195 days. This data provides the tangible, undeniable proof of the scarcity paradox in action. It demonstrates that Cucinelli is not just underperforming its peers, but is an extreme outlier, holding more than double the inventory of Hermes, the industry's gold standard for scarcity management. The 404-day figure substantiates the claim of bloated inventory beyond rhetoric and provides the clear operational motive for the alleged need for brand-damaging discounting. This level of overstock is directly linked to the destructive dynamics of the grey market. Excess inventory, which luxury brands are loath to destroy due to new regulations or discount openly for fear of brand dilution, inevitably finds an outlet in unauthorized channels. The appearance of a brand like Cucinelli in a mass-market discounter is the ultimate materialization of this paradox. It shatters the carefully maintained illusion of exclusivity, permanently erodes price integrity, and devalues the brand in the eyes of its core clientele, who pay a premium precisely to avoid such associations, much like the issues raised in the Miu Miu problem. Ultimately, a company's inventory level is not just a line item on a balance sheet. It is the most honest and unvarnished reflection of its true operational strategy. It reveals the chasm between its marketed image and its material reality. A brand can publish treatises on gentle luxury and the virtue of measure, but holding over a year's worth of inventory is the material expression of a strategy based on overproduction and volume. The balance sheet, in this sense, becomes a more truthful document than the company's philosophical statements. The DSI figure is a confession, written in numbers, that the brand is subject to the same commercial pressures as any other mass producer. The inventory crisis is the point where the immaterial narrative collides with, and is broken by, the material facts of the business. The market as a barometer of belief. A crisis of confidence. The market's reaction to the Morpheus report was immediate and brutal. A record stock drop, a temporary trading halt, and the vaporization of over €1 billion in shareholder value. This was not a simple financial adjustment. It was a semiotic event, a powerful message from the collective financial consciousness. In the aftermath, several investment bank analysts labeled the market's reaction overdone. Their logic was grounded in conventional financial modeling. Since Russian sales constituted only 2% of Cucinelli's total revenue, a nearly 20% drop in valuation seemed disproportionate. This analysis, however, represents a profound failure of the traditional financial worldview. Such models are adept at pricing revenue streams and projecting earnings, but they are utterly inept at pricing the intangible yet immensely valuable asset of belief. Brunello Cucinelli's premium valuation, trading at a P/E ratio between 43x and 46x, far above its industry peers, was never justified by its fundamentals alone. It was a narrative premium, willingly paid by investors who had bought into the compelling story of humanistic capitalism and its philosopher-king founder. Viewed through this lens, the stock drop was not an overreaction but a swift and brutally rational repricing of the Company X narrative. The market did not subtract 2% of value to account for the 2% of revenue at risk. It subtracted the immense, unquantifiable value of the brand's compromised authenticity. It was a vote of no confidence, executed not at the ballot box, but through a cascade of sell orders. This event signals a paradigm shift in which financial markets are evolving into powerful, high-speed mechanisms for auditing and enforcing corporate authenticity. In an information-saturated environment, a loss of consumer trust is no longer a slow-burning reputational issue that unfolds over years. It is an immediate and catastrophic financial event. Research into investor psychology confirms that markets are driven by powerful narratives and react violently to their disruption. A broken narrative creates profound uncertainty, which triggers a flight from risk. The Cucinelli affair is the definitive demonstration of this new reality. The market is no longer just pricing assets and cash flows, it is pricing integrity. Brand authenticity is not a soft metric for the marketing department but a core, quantifiable financial asset subject to immense volatility. The resilient object and the post-luxury alternative. The case of Brunello Cucinelli provides a definitive, real-world validation of the central critique that I, Christopher Banks, have articulated through the philosophy of post-luxury conceptual functional art. Post-luxury conceptual functional art. It demonstrates with surgical precision that a value system built on an intangible, centrally controlled corporate narrative is inherently fragile. It is perpetually susceptible to sudden, catastrophic collapse the moment that narrative is credibly challenged by material or geopolitical facts. When the story breaks, the value evaporates. This crisis of narrative value confirms that the philosophy of post-luxury conceptual functional art, which I have developed as the intellectual architecture for this collection, is not a theoretical exercise but an urgent and necessary alternative. Post-luxury conceptual functional art proposes a radical relocation of value, moving it away from the ephemeral story and anchoring it in the resilient, verifiable truth of the object itself. The value of a post-luxury conceptual functional art object is derived from sources that are transparent and intrinsic. It resides in the verifiable provenance of its noble materials, the demonstrable skill and savoir-faire of the master craftsman who gave it form, and the intellectual and conceptual rigor that informs its design. This value is not dependent on the moral character of a founder or the geopolitical pronouncements of a corporation. The worth of a post-luxury conceptual functional art object cannot be debunked by a short seller because it is a function of material and conceptual facts, not a marketing campaign. An artifact like the Ndlovu wallet, forged from ethically sourced elephant leather and shell cordovan by a master artisan, possesses an integrity that is self-evident and immune to reputational contagion. In this new paradigm, the relationship to the object is transformed. The individual is no longer a passive consumer of a corporate myth, but an active steward of a tangible history. They become the custodian and co-author of the object's ongoing narrative, a story that deepens with use and time rather than one that is subject to corporate revisionism or market panic. The future of objects of enduring value lies not in the hollow cathedrals of corporate storytelling, but in the quiet, resilient authority of the objects themselves. The Cucinelli collapse is not an end, but a beginning, a necessary clearing of the ground for a more honest, transparent, and ultimately more valuable paradigm to emerge. It is for this new paradigm that the Objects of Affection collection, under my direction as Christopher Banks, was conceived, to champion the search for true objects of affection. Authored by Christopher Banks, anthropologist of luxury and critical theorist. Office of Critical Theory and Curatorial Strategy, Objects of Affection Collection. The remainder of this study continues at objectsofaffectioncollection.com. This has been a study from the Objects of Affection Collection, a critical art research institution operating under the framework of post-luxury conceptual functional art. Read the full research at objectsofaffectioncollection.com.